Hello, YouTube. This is a weird one. You'll find out why right after the intro, so let's just cut out the middleman and get into it, shall we? After a failed suicide attempt, a depressed man begins taking care of his neighbor's dog. The weird thing is that he sees the dog as just a guy dressed up in a dog costume that's constantly either wrecking his life or guiding him towards happiness. That's the professional way of describing this show, though. I personally like describing it as Frodo from Lord of the Rings talks to / gets high with a dog that he sees as a person. Either way you want to look at it, it's a weird concept. What's even weirder is that it works. Most of the humor comes from typical dog things being given a different context, like a can full of pennies being used as a torture device, or Wilfred's favorite toy being an alcoholic and sex fiend that Wilfred even marries at one point. It mostly plays off of the regular being given a surreal edge. It never goes past the point that becomes risque or too unbelievable in the right context, that is, but walks that fine line. There's also an element of mystery to it from what Wilfred is. It seems kind of clear that it's all in Ryan's head, but as the show goes on, it calls that into question. Like, there's another guy named Bruce who sees Wilfred the same way that Ryan does and has known him for years, although he might not even exist. Then there's the cult that's introduced about halfway through called the Flock of the Grey Shepherd. Supposedly they worship two dog gods, one that'll lead you to happiness and one that'll lead you to ruin. They're probably the biggest mystery of the show and hold the most clues about Wilfred. I'm not going to give away what happens with them, but since their introduction they become a constant mystery and add a bit more suspense to the show. The best part of the show to me, though, is how it tackles emotions and mental illness. I'll get into both of those in a bit more detail when we get to the characters, but story-wise, those are the central themes of the show. Wilfred is, at its core, about Ryan's journey from nearly killing himself to finding some semblance of happiness, and it shows the highs and lows of that journey. Wilfred forces him to do things he never would, like stand up to his dad or crying over a hard breakup. He gives him the confidence that he always had, but never used. No episode feels like filler because each one looks at a different part of himself until linking him back to what he wanted in the first place. It might not be a conventional form of happiness that he finds, but it is to him. Happiness is different for all the characters on the show too, and whether they find it or not is dependent on if they're ready to forget who they were and embrace who they become over the course of the show. As for the mental illness aspect, it's mostly seen with Ryan and his mom, and I love how it's depicted. It's nice to see a series show it not just as self or regularly destructive. That happens at times, but it also shows how it can be something that people can not only live with, but bring them excitement in the mundane or help them cope with past or present hardships. There's hundreds of shows out there that show mental illness in a negative light, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be shown that way, but I'm glad there's at least this show to see both the good and bad sides of it. And so for the story, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. It might have a sense of humor that's not for everyone, but can be very funny for those that is. It also has a compelling mystery and a lot of heart. So for the characters, let's start off with the most important one of all. Bear. Bear is a stuffed bear that's saved from a doggy daycare where the owner molests the dogs with peanut butter and becomes Wilfred's love interest. We only see her as Wilfred does once, and her character is built up as a not really recovering alcoholic that Wilfred mostly loves for the sex they have. Still, she's his girlfriend for most of this show, and even wife eventually, and can be pretty funny with how Wilfred interacts off of her. So for actually important characters, let's start with Ryan. I've already talked a good deal about his journey through the show, so let's get into backstory. His parents split up when he was a kid, with his mother being institutionalized and his father running a law firm that he makes Ryan join. After becoming notorious for blackmailing people in order to win cases, he tries to quit to start his own law firm, but his partner stayed. Ultimately, he became miserable with his life and tried to overdose on pills, which catches us up to where the show starts. He's plays the straight man for the most part, with his past taking a while to be revealed in full. But Elijah Wood does a fantastic job playing him straight, even during the more absurd parts, and showing the complex side to him. Like I've already said, Wilfred is mostly there to force Ryan to do things, good and bad, that he wouldn't normally do, even if it seems like the worst possible option or is underhanded and manipulative. Because of this, it's hard to tell if he's trying to help or hurt him, even if he says he's on his side. He's also a comic relief for the show by him doing regular dog things, just made awkward by him being a guy in a costume and generally an a-hole. Any moments of opening up from him, he tries to laugh off or avoid, so there isn't that much to him beyond the basics, but I like him as is. Jenna is Wilfred's owner and is generally seen as everything Ryan isn't. She's outgoing, caring, in a good relationship, and has a good job that she likes. That's her at first glance, though, as we get to see a bit of a tomboy, uncertain, and even unhappy side to her as the show progresses. Her boyfriend and eventually husband, Drew, is likable but generic. He's nice, not the sharpest tool in the shed, but is a good person and does care about Jenna a lot. Kristen is Ryan's older sister and a bit of a controlling bitch sometimes, but does have redeeming qualities that slowly surface. She's controlling because of what happened with their mother, as that was her way to deal with what happened. After her marriage falls apart and she becomes a single mother, she starts to drop that persona and allows people in more and becomes more vulnerable and becomes a much more likable character because of that. Speaking of her mother, let's talk about Kathleen. She spent a good chunk of her life in an institution due to a breakdown, which she primarily blames on her husband and Ryan and Christian's father, Henry. Over time, though, she does start to see what role she played in ending up there, which ultimately leads her to a better relationship with her kids, Henry, and embracing what makes her special in a more constructive way. Admittedly, some of her more hippie moments were a bit annoying sometimes, but she's a likable enough character, and you can see how she ended up the way that she did. Then there's Henry. I'd argue one of the most interesting characters on the show. He's depicted as a manipulative and controlling man who essentially broke his wife and kids for most of the show. He is those things, but there's a reason why. He co-runs a law firm, has a wife with mental issues who he tried to do right by the only way he thought he could, and tried to keep his kids from going down the same road. He's a man who'd do anything for his family, even if that makes him the bad guy. Amanda was a scientist that Ryan started dating in season 2, and their relationship led to some very painful revelations. She's nice, funny, and willing to open up to Ryan about things she can't tell anybody else. At first, the problem is that Ryan can't do the same, which ends their relationship. Ultimately, Amanda does re-enter his life, and I won't spoil the outcome, but they both end up hurting each other. As for her character, I really liked her. She's cool, but also awkward, and led to some great story arcs. For the last character, it's Bruce. He's always fun. He shows up each season to play mind games that only Wilfred understands or cares about, making his relationship a mystery for most of the series. And he's a really fun recurring character that I like seeing return each season. So for the characters, I'm going to give them an 8.5 out of 10. They're all very compelling and fleshed out, and work really well off of each other. So for the show overall, it's strange, but that doesn't make it bad. It may take a bit to get used to its style, but if you do, you'll find several compelling character journeys through a really unique lens. I don't think we'll ever get another show like this, unless we count the Australian version, and that's okay, because it did what it set out to do. It shined a light on under-talked about issues while having a lot of fun with it. So for the show overall, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this one, and it's October, so next time, as always, we'll be visiting 112 Ocean Avenue. Wait a minute, which one are we on? Can't we just skip that one? Fine. Next time is Amityville Curse. Pray for me, people. Pray for me.